As the instructor walks to class, he double checks his watch to make sure he's not too early, as it is normal for the instructor to be approximately 5 to 10 minutes early, yet the students are expected to be 10 minutes early so that they can prep any devices they're going to use to record or find a good seat, converse with their friends, make sure their notes are right, and all the other doodads that need to be done prior to each and every class. Being that this is a military academy, they all seem to walk briskly with their shoulders back and their heads up. Many of those who saw the instructor walking towards the class suddenly picked up their pace, and many went into a full sprint, whipping right past the instructor. The instructor, of course, realized which students these were and smiled a little bit, chuckling internally, realizing, hey, I did the same crap when I was a kid, so I can't hold it against them too much. As the instructor stopped at the doorway and waited outside, he could hear everyone whispering to them, the instructor's here, the instructor's here, hey, get ready, get your shit ready. He again chuckled a little bit as he realized there was a few getting ready to call the room to attention when he walked in. As he looked at his watch again, he realized that he had approximately 2 minutes. This is where he waited. He counted down and would enter the room approximately 1 minute before class began. This would give him, and if anybody he was with, enough time to go into class, set up what they needed to, as they had already had the lesson plan already scheduled and set up. But we would make sure that they had everything lined up so the class went well. As he double-checked his watch again, the analog watch again clicked up 1 minute prior. He turned to walk in, and just as the entire class jumped up, he heard one of them about to call the room to attention and just yelled, "As you were! Sit down, we got a lot to cover." The instructor saw everybody starting to get back down into their seats and simply opened up his briefcase as he put it onto the table. Pulling out the few notes that he had on the subject, he also started to go through his computer. This one was linked up to all the arrays, the 3D graphics, and also any type of projection picture that might come up was already preloaded. Quickly finishing up everything he needed to do, the instructor simply looked at the clock and said, "All right, class, shut the doors. We got a lot to cover today, and we're going to get right to it." Clicking on an image, he looks through, and everyone knows this photo. This is a very interesting photo from one of the deep space satellites that just happened to be close enough to catch a broadside picture of the Battle of Saul. "You all know about this one," he states. "This is the Battle of the Soul Sector. Okay, a battle for our soul is what you guys like to call it, and I always knew that was going to show up because that's something that came from before my generation. Now, since generations are kind of a moot point nowadays, since we have the technology that we have, well, let's just say it's before your time. All that being said, I wanted to get into immediately the different types of tactics and logistics of this battle. Now, most of you are fully aware of the timeline of what happened. However, I still need to go over for those who are not completely understanding of how everything went down and in what order. The first things first, changing the image to a 3D image, one of our deep space probes was able to catch the FTL as it was just starting to reach outside the sector. As of right now, we can barely catch FTL a few minutes before it enters the sector. That being said, we do not have the technology yet to stop them from entering the sector. That is being developed. Oh wait, you're not supposed to hear that. Hint, hint. Several of the students looked up and suddenly grinned a little bit. It was very common for this instructor to give some sort of hint of what technology may be coming down the pipe, as these were going to be future sailors inside the Terran Navy. Or they're going to be piloting their own ships, and they need to know what's out there so they can work with it, not against it. As humans were definitely on the chopping block after all the issues that had happened already, well, if they didn't want species-wide annihilation, they better listen up. The instructor continued, "As you know, we all caught them coming in, and it was a very large mass of group, a very large group of vessels coming in. We do not take this sort of thing lightly, ever. We made that mistake one time and one time only, and that was well before I started breathing." As you all know, in World War II, they dismissed the large group of fighters and thought it was something completely different, or they thought their radar was malfunctioning or what have you. Even though our new deep space sensors are more accustomed to experimental technology, we were not dismissing anything. And a good thing, too. That put everyone on alert, and thankfully so, because as soon as the enemy fleets came in, well, game on. And of course, everyone chimed in, yeah, game on. I'm glad you all know that reference. The instructor tried to make light of a serious subject, as that would help keep everyone's attention. Alright, now you can see the disposition of the enemy fleet. They weren't stupid. They had everything set up. Most of their main guns were spread out evenly across the entire formation. Now, they didn't quite set up in spindle formation as we do. However, it was more of a cul-de-sac formation, which we're still trying to figure out why this was. However, it does make a little bit of sense, as the edges of the cul-de-sac are what actually had their big guns. They were spacing them out as best they could. We surmised that they were trying to do this so that if they had to give a full-on frontal volley, they would be able to fire all their main guns in a wide path so that eventually their rounds, wherever they hit, would hit something. Now, I know a lot of you are playing many of the video games that everything is guided. No matter, every time you shoot, the rounds will automatically turn and hit their target, even if they're dummy rounds. This is not the case. When you're talking about distances this long, a lot of things change. The reason why we set up in our formation is to maximize our firepower for the same exact reason. If you look at the way that they're lining up, if they fired, it's very difficult to find a gap in between every single one of these ships that our ships would be able to dodge, so their rounds would hit something. You need to remember that even energy weapons, even our lasers, which we will get into in a few minutes, even our turrets take time to cross distances that far. Even though it's several seconds, it's enough for somebody to move out of the way if they want to. So keep that in mind, everybody, while you're doing this. Distance means everything in space. Since terrain does not dictate unless you're outside in the Oort cloud or the asteroid belt or something like that, and they definitely were not. We were actually beyond the asteroid belt at this point, most of them, but we'll get into that again later. That is what made all this formation I shouldn't say nonsense. The formation make a little bit more sense. Understand that everything, it doesn't matter what, at that distance, you have time to move. Now, because of that, I want you all to realize that you need to back your brains up in time. Back your brains up so that back during the Civil War and Revolutionary Wars of the Americas, I want you to think about everyone lining up and firing into each other in volleys. It's the same thing, because the weapons were not as accurate. Though one group was far more accurate than the other, it didn't matter. Using a smoothbore musket meant that you're gonna miss. A lot of times you are gonna miss. Now, granted, certain doctrines made it so that the ones who wore red missed a hell of a lot more than the ones who wore blue, but that's a whole nother class. This is not a history class. This is a tactics class. So understand that and understand it well. Now, we're going to move on to as they advanced. All right, you can see, as I speed up time here, the image changes to the 3D image of the fleets beginning to join forces. Several of the human fleets were able to join up fairly quickly. Now, you can't do an FTL jump right through the asteroid field unless you want to go many levels of splat. Okay, it's just not a good idea. That being said, once they got through the asteroid field, it was pretty much smooth sailing, no pun intended. As you can see by this here, the Venetian fleet was way out of place. They could not join the main group with Earth and Mars. However, the Earth and Martian fleet was more than capable of taking care of everything. Now, they did get, as you can see in this graph here, they did get several more ships from like Io and things of that nature. However, since they're simply satellites, they do not have the ability to create large ships like we did. However, them still bringing in their own ships was still a bonus. It is always better to have more ships in a straight up slugfest like this. The instructor once again changed the image. As you can see, once they lined up, it was more in spindle formation, lining everything up so that we could maximize the area of space that we could hit. At that point, everyone locked in with each other. All the AIs and gunners started locking into each other so that they could do their little dance, their little serenade, their little conductor swing that they were going to do with all their turrets. Now, it is of note that ever since the Battle of Poltava, we have known that ballistic turrets are more than enough to flip over even our largest colony ships. We have switched over to energy weapons. Now, there's a major issue with the energy weapons, which we will address soon. As you can see, and I'm sure you've all seen it by now, that at this point, it looks like energy whips going through as they begin to fire their turrets towards the enemy fleet. The reason they were using energy weapons first is because we have been able to condense our particle beams to the point where they do not disperse anywhere near as fast as a standard laser. Now, for those of you who are looking into engineering, this is going to be easy for you to understand. Those of you who are not, simply understand that without being able to contain the beam itself, it will simply disperse very, very quickly. Think of your flashlight. How fast does that thing widen out to the sides and the light just kind of dissipate into nothing unless you're able to condense it somehow. Keep this in mind. You need to know your ship, as stated before, stem to stern, port to ventral, bulkhead to bolt. You need to know it all. If you do not understand it, you cannot use it. Understand?
Yes, sir,
they all said. Good. Now, as you can see, as the energy waves were sent across, and I'm simply going to call them waves because as you can see, the distance, because they were moving the turrets, makes the energy from each of these cannons look like it's a whip. It's not actually a whip. As they dragged them across, each of these turrets, when it fired, would strike across and cut into the enemy fleet. Now, it is of note that these particle beams are extremely hot. And that is why, as you can see, he moved over and got another image, a close 3D image of one of the enemy cruisers. Once it struck this ship, it did cause catastrophic damage even from a grazing hit. Fast forwarding the image, the beam was brought across just down on its starboard ventral side, just barely swiping the side of the ship as it moved away from the beam itself. However, it is seen in the image that the compartments explode at this point. As you can see, the ship itself blew. Part of it just exploded. Now, who here can tell me why? Hands shoot up across the stage. You in the back, over right there. The instructor pointing his hand straight at the student. The student stood up. Sir, it's because it lit the atmosphere on fire, sir. Absolutely, cadet. That is 100% right. You can sit down. You need to understand that these things are so hot that they will quite literally cause every oxygen molecule to bond with something and combust. If there's any hydrogen, kablooey. Okay? And these guys happen to use a type of methane to breathe with. Now, it's a very light methane, but it is still mixed with a whole bunch of hydrogen. Which is why, when we do get this picture, changing the image, you can see that the atmosphere blowing out of here is not the standard yellow and orange that we're used to. It is different colors of green and blue, along with the standard colors we're used to. Reason being is that, congratulations, you just lit a fart on fire. Letting the laughter kind of joke around. You need to understand that every single species has a different way of breathing, a different way of operating, a different way of living. You need to understand that, so with each different type of species, you know how to deal with them most effectively. And for those of you to understand, dealing with this effectively means you need to know how to kill them very, very quickly. It doesn't have to be gruesome, it just has to be quick. Put them down, done, over. Move on to the next one. Now, as you can see in the video, as he fast forwards it, each of these turrets sends a beam across which swipes across the sky. Each turret is still with its standard 3 barrels. The kicker is, what the aliens didn't know, is we can fire them once every 5 to 20 minutes, depending on how much the power output was. And the fact that the power output on these was cranked up to 100%, well, left to this issue right here, and most everyone has seen this. This is not a doctored photo. I want you to all understand this. The image shows several turrets actually glowing red and white hot. They're glowing so hot against the side of the ship that it looks like they're about to explode. The cadets look on in awe as they realize this actually is what happened. Understand this, once we fired our full volley, we had to let the cannons cool. This is not something that has to happen at 50% power or lower. So if they were within, say, one planet's orbit, we would be able to just continually fire at them. But they wouldn't be able to dodge them anyway, and we wouldn't have to leave streaks across. Again, distance is what? Key, sir! Everyone screams out. Good. Now, if you look at this, after we ran out of energy weapons, we realized that they were close enough for their own ordnance to fire. Our guys did not wait. As they fired their final volley, they allowed their first round of torpedoes to go out. These torpedoes were set to be dumb munitions initially. They were meant specifically to hit the front line, take up a lot of their point defense system fire, and find out exactly what the hell we're facing. You need to understand this. This is why decoys are used so often in modern warfare. Everybody uses decoys. We looked and we actually tore their ships apart. They were loaded with decoys. In fact, some of the things we were shooting at, if you look at this image here, one moment. Yes, you'll see here, next to one of these destroyers and on its buddy frigate, you will see decoys in between. Each of these we were actually picking up as additional ships. Now, each of them has their own atmosphere inside, but they were given off a signature relatively the same as one of their destroyers, which made us think they were a whole lot more dangerous than they were. It is truly believed that they were trying to goat us into getting close, as we found out that they did not fire their ordnance, their first round that is, until ours was at least 50% on its way. Now, this took about 5 to 10 minutes for it to actually reach. And that's because of what, class? Distance, sir. Exactly. Understand that the distances cause these battles to go on for a long, long time. And it is ever since the age of sail went away and we started using turrets on Ironsides and things like that. As you know, the first time Ironsides met, there was no victor. And the battle just kept going and going and going until they either ran out of ammo or they had to leave because the tide was going out. He changes his image again. Now, when the first set of torpedoes actually did strike, we didn't get as much as we thought initially. These reports came in after, and if you'll see the image here, if you take this image and overlay it with this one, setting an image right next to it, you can see that about 25 to 45% of what we struck was actually the decoys, which was the initial round of explosions, really. We started hitting their engines, and their engines caught their own atmosphere on fire. The more dummy munitions, even though they're harder to strike down, still have a little bit of explosive in them, just for basically good measure. However, this was the reason why they were able to keep fighting so much, and we were able to send out our next round of torpedoes and ballistics this time. Now, for everyone to understand, ballistics are not going away anytime soon. If your energy weapons fail, you still need a direct fire weapon system. You always need a backup, and you need a backup to your backup, which is why we have mid and short range ballistic weapons on every single one of our ships. Even on our cargo haulers, you'll get medium and short range weapons. Why? Well, they tried piracy, a few folks, back in the day, and it didn't go over quite well. Why? We have medium and short range weapons on our ships. We're going to shoot you. Okay, I don't want to get off topic. So you can look up the pirates in another class. That's another history class. However, I want you to understand that when the first group of torpedoes came in, we all thought we're going to be taking huge losses. And to our absolute shock and dismay, well, I shouldn't say ours, but more theirs, our point defense system laid into them quite well. It's surprising how many actually detonated right before striking the hull of a ship. Now, do we get away unscathed? Absolutely not. A few of the ships did get damaged. A few had to pull off the line for repairs. One of our torpedo frigates, which is a new design, was almost struck, and he actually, it's still funny to hear the radio transmission between the two. I don't have the audio, but I will say it's hilarious when a communications officer says, "Thank you, I think I just shit myself." Yeah, I would too if I was sitting on that much ordnance and there was something coming at me. That being said, there was another issue. Our battleships. I don't know why they didn't think we would upgrade our battleships. The Poltava was shot to hell, so much so that it was decommissioned and only one small piece of it still remains. All of our other battleships are so heavily armored that most of what they sent couldn't breach the hull even though it struck, and you can see in this video, yep, right here. The cadets are shown an image of one of the battleships trying desperately to shoot several torpedoes as they get in very close. They get all but one. One strikes the side of the hull. There's a burst and the ship lurches hard to one side. But it's still there. There's not even atmosphere breaching out the hull. Now, as you all know from your engineering class, this is the double redundancy hull design. As you can see as I zoom in close, yep, there it is. That honeycomb structure is a nanite composite. It's a basically self-healing system. So unless they get through the outer hull, that, and the inner hull, they're not breaching shit. The enemy did not realize that we were already starting to work on this technology when the Battle of the Poltava actually happened. Now, we're going to move on to the next sector of the battle itself. One second. Where's that video? I had it. I swear to you, students, I had it. And, oh, yep, here it is. All right. Here is the volley of torpedoes and then ballistics. As you can see, there's a noticeable delay between the firing of the torpedoes and the ballistics. As you know, the ballistics will travel much faster. Most of them are being fired from either rail guns or coil guns. Difference being, well, simple movement of electrons. I'm not going to get into it. Again, this is not an engineering class. This is a tactics class. Now, as you can see, the delay did not actually stop the ballistics from striking first. They actually overtook the torpedoes, and unfortunately, we do not have any video of the from the torpedoes as the ballistics went by. But the fact that it's in the middle of the darkness of space, you probably wouldn't have seen much anyway. As we look here on the radar, we can see that the ballistics actually came in. The enemy was actually so busy trying to fire off the ballistic shots, which they barely did. And apparently they forgot that inertia is a thing, because as you can see in, hold on, I'll keep this video here, and so this one here. Here's one of their frigates. They're able to deflect one of our ballistic shells, but it's still going, it's still tumbling, and instead of piercing the ship, you can see it hits it broadside and crossbody blocks the whole thing and cuts the whole thing in half. And yeah, I'm sure that was not a welcome sight for any of the enemy forces. Were they able to stop some of our ballistics? Yes. However, they were so busy trying to stop them, they did not stop our next round of torpedoes. And that one was absolutely devastating. And by the time they even started to realize how bad they were getting screwed, there was another volley on the way. Now, it is of note that the enemy did not stop firing. Okay, they just kept going. They were completely, as it used to be called, ride or die. They were ready to just do anything they could just to take out a few of us. Now, it is understandable that the galactic population far exceeds ours. Our population is barely at this point around 9 billion. And that's over all the different planets and satellites, not to mention all the ships and everywhere else. We are, as far as the galactic community is concerned, we are a tiny little village with barely anyone in it. So they are able to simply throw bodies at a problem until the problem goes away. We do not have that option, which is why they kept firing more and more and more. And as soon as we realized that their fleet was dropping in the tens of percentiles every single time a volley of our ordnance hit, the Venusian fleet was actually called off. It was something else, and you all have the audio, I'm sure you have, of the Venetian admiral getting pissed off saying, "Oh, you didn't leave anybody for us." Well, it is also of note that they actually killed more per ship than any of the rest of the fleet. Because as the main fleets of Earth and Mars were busy taking down this group, another one thought they'd be sneaky. And here they are. Here's a 3D image from the radar right here. As you can see, it is almost as large as that first one. And at that point, the Venetian fleet realized that they were severely outnumbered, like beyond anything they were ready for. And the rest of the fleet was way out of place. It would take them way too long. The Venetian fleet would have turned into the first wave of alien forces. They would have simply been decimated by the just insane numbers of ordnance coming at them. Even our ships can only handle so much. And understand that. Our ships are still ships. They can still be sunk, in a sense. You don't actually sink in space. If you're sinking, you're in deep thought. A few people stopped to think about what he just said. Yeah, I know it's a dad joke. I'm trying to keep you occupied. Now, I will say that out of desperation, the Venusian admiral used a technology we weren't sure was going to work. This was a fluke. We had been testing nanite bombs for a long time, and more often than not, they're like a vacuum. They just suck. They would usually only take out maybe 3 or 4 ships, eaten through the hull of maybe a dozen in a group this size, and that was it. They would simply shut off. They're under a timer, actually. After a certain amount of time, they simply self-delete their programming. And without the programming, they just stop, period. They don't make more of themselves. As you can see, they got within range. They did fire their one ordnance with this. It is of extreme note that this ordnance was very, very, very large, which is why they only have one of them. It takes an actual battleship to deploy this piece of equipment. Just like back in the day, we had a air burst bomb that had to be delivered by a cargo plane just because it was so big. It would not fit on an actual attack aircraft. So that is why they only had one. Not only experimental, but most ships cannot carry this thing. It is just too massive. Why is it massive? You need that much to spread the nanites out. You need to shove them out into space at a speed absolutely insane, and you have to have so many of them to actually make a dent, because one nanite, after about maybe an hour of working, might, and I stress might, cut a hole in the hull about the size of your pinky nail, which is something that any crew can easily handle. It is also noted that this ordnance was something that most people don't like handling. For those of you who don't understand nanite technology, especially nanite weapons, you need to pay more attention in your medical classes, as nanite technology is one of the key proponents in our current medical technology. It's the reason why I am a hell of a lot older than I look, I'll tell you that much. Now, when it was deployed, you can see on the video, it was launched as fast as possible. It actually had a 3-stage rocket to try and get it to its area of deployment as fast as possible. And honestly, I think the enemy didn't know what was going on. I think they thought it was a propaganda thing. A ship or some missile going out. Now, they did move. We will give them this. They did move a few ships to make sure this piece of ordnance simply flew between them. See, there's no guidance rockets on this thing. Not yet. I'm not saying they're working on it, but there's no guidance engines, no boosters on any side. This thing flies straight and true, and that's it. And it goes for a certain amount of time and then goes off. That's all. There's no fancy schmancy anything to this. Now, as the ordnance got close to the enemy fleet, you can see in the video how they got out of the way. They didn't even get able to fire at it, as just as it got within point defense weapons range, you can see it deploying. The image itself shows the rocket blowing off its nose cone and the sides opening up and flailing out as though the scales on a snake were being pushed the opposite direction and exposing the skin. And then you could see small bursts from everywhere, from the front of the ordnance all the way to the back, in sequence, all the way to the back. These bursts are what sent the nanites out in a small cloud. So small that most sensors couldn't pick up the nanites themselves. They picked up the explosion. And as those bursts went out, the ordnance that it came in simply went adrift. The enemy was probably looking at them crazy. Now, if you look close, you can see that some of the enemy ships were actually trying to back away, but it was far too late. That burst you saw sent the nanites out at about 3/4 the speed of sound. When ships are as close as they are, within a couple of kilometers, you have only a few seconds before the nanites start to end up on top of you. And since the ordnance was very close to the center of their formation, it did catch most of their frigates and destroyers. It didn't get many of their battleships, unfortunately, but because frigates and destroyers usually don't have a thicker hull, it chewed right through them very quickly. And if you don't have a strong stomach, I strongly suggest that you turn away for the next part of this image. He continued the video as it showed that the ships were being eaten away, as though the ships themselves were going through hundreds of thousands of years of poor maintenance, as the hulls seemed to rust away, chip away into small pieces, the small pieces disintegrating as they went away, and then large, huge gaps started opening up in the hull. They ate all the way through to the crew compartments, and then crew members started being vented out into space, many of them still flailing around, flapping whatever appendages they might have, be they 2 arms, 4, or a tail maybe. Each of them looked absolutely petrified as they started to run out of oxygen. If they were lucky, the sudden loss of oxygen would suck all the air out of their lungs, or whatever they call lungs in their species, and they would immediately pass out. They wouldn't wake up. It was at that point the fleet must have realized something was wrong, as they sent a few in to try and find out what was going on, and they too got caught in the nanite swarm. The nanites would continue to spread out across the formation. Even if a small handful touched the ship, there was no shutting them off. They just ate through the ship themselves, finding themselves pushed closer and closer to the engine compartments. For those that are watching, you need to understand that the nanite swarm themselves is designed specifically to seek out any type of energy, which is why if you watch on the video, you can see that they're going straight towards their weapons and they're going straight towards the engines. mostly towards the engines. But when they go towards the weapons, you can see, and on the video, one of the ships simply explodes, shortly followed by 2 or 3 more. Yeah, that happens. Critical mass is a thing. You need to understand that these nanites are extremely dangerous, and most everybody at this point is thinking about legislation to extremely limit nanite swarms of any type. They are beyond dangerous and difficult to control. The only option you have if you have a nanite swarm is an EMP blast, and a very strong one at that. You're not talking about, well, let me put it in a phrase you'll understand. If we had a nanite outbreak in this room, they would hit this area with an EMP so strong that almost everybody in this room would be fried, because your brain and your heart are an electrical system. It would just be done. It would overload. They would need to hit it that strong to make sure they got every single nanite, which is what we did after the battle, by the way, but we will be getting into that in a couple of minutes. As you can see, the Venetian fleet didn't actually take any true casualties, except for those jumping up and down and might have slipped. They did take out many more ships than anybody else. Though they don't look at that with a sense of pride, a win's a win. Winning is winning, period. Okay? Because, as we all know, in our line of work, there is no second place. Second place is a body bag. Understand that, and understand that very, very well. So we will take them down with any means necessary. Now, after the battle, as you know, not a single one of the enemy ships was able to retreat, as we had already sent enough ordnance from the first fleet to take out all the engines. They did not have the ability to jump. The second fleet that was going to be sneaky, well, there's no fleet left. And once it was over, we did send a control ship in there. This ship was completely unmanned, and yes, we do have the video. Here it is. They are seeing a 3D image of a small frigate. It is covered, just covered on all sides by different antennae. Different styles as well. This is what we call the EMP ship. Once you use it, it's a one-off, because it will quite literally cook itself, and you'll see here in the video. Let me fast forward. Okay, to right about here. This is when it started reaching the nanite swarm. We did have cameras close enough where we could see what was going on, and you can see as soon as the nanites touched it, they started to eat it. Many of those antennas were immediately put out of action within just a few seconds. But they weren't expecting what's coming next. He hits play, and you see a burst of energy. An actual ball of energy comes out of it. The ball actually can be seen with a shockwave going in an omnidirectional fashion all the way out. It seemed to almost warp time and warp space in a way. But as it did, around everywhere in the direction of the swarm, you could see tiny little specks just popping. Those were the nanites exploding. That's what happens with nanites. When you hit them with an EMP, they fry and they blow up. They don't have there's no way of protecting them from this. And this is our #1 weapon against the nanite storm. Now, we do have other ones, smaller EMP cannons. They are now currently being installed on every single ship, just in case the enemy did actually see that we did this. We don't need them coming at us with any type of nanites. And also, better to have and not need than need and not have, sir. Good, you all remembered that one. Along with that was the cleanup with the first fleet. We did send at least 3 more EMP ships in to make sure we got all the nanites. Again, they are extremely dangerous, and we are not playing games with those things at all. Do not trifle with them ever. Ever. I don't care if you end up being an ordnance tech. Now on to the original first fleet that jumped into Seoul. We were able to salvage a lot of the computers. Our eggheads, those 30-pound brain guys, are unbelievably good at this sort of thing. I mean, it's what they do. They've done this for decades. They are so good at this, it's crazy. I cannot stress how important it is also to get as much intel as possible, because the old phrase is information is ammunition, sir. Good, you remembered that one too. And you always want the secret of life, which is more ammo, sir. Exactly. Now, on to what we found inside. We found out that this was almost exclusively a single species that came at us. They got froggy, decided to jump. They didn't realize that we as humans are extremely territorial and have no interest in watching our loved ones being put in chains or our planets being glassed. So, yeah. We found out that they were planning on sending another fleet in, but as soon as they started hearing the screamings from everybody about how they were getting torn apart, that fleet was recalled, which was nice for us because our battleships were actually running low on torpedoes at that point. They only had, by most accounts, only 3 more volleys of torpedoes. If that, most of the frigates and destroyers had already run dry, which is why we have our new torpedo frigates, and here's a picture of one. As you can see by the exploded view here, this thing is designed specifically for that. There's almost no other weapons on it except for some short-range defensive weapons. This thing is crazy scary to the enemy because it can pump out an incredible amount of torpedoes, all of them armored, all of them guided, all of them ready to go right up your nose and up any other orifice it might find. Also, we have here detailed plans of their own military. As it turns out, they put a whole lot into this, and they're concerned that if they don't get their fleets back, they might be open to invasion from another group. You know what I say? Fuck them. So anyways, for right now, most of our tactics are being double-checked and triple-checked at this point because you always double-check. It never hurts to double-check, ever. So, cadets, do you have any additional questions? We are getting short on time here. Does anybody have any more questions? A few hands raised. All right, you, right there. The young female stands up. Sir, I just was wondering, we've been hearing rumors that the galactic community outside of our sectors are withdrawing. And would that mean a drawdown as far as military? That's a good question, Cadet. Have a seat. Now, you all know that I keep you all informed as best I can, so it doesn't leave this room. As it stands now, many of the other species out there, the sentient species that were working with us to try and bring a peaceful solution, have actually left. They're scared to death of us. They don't want anything to do with us. They've actually given us word to stay out of their sectors, which, of course, we have no problems with. Very few have elected to stay, but you can actually see the fear in their eyes when they talk to us. If they have any type of aggressive stance, they are immediately checked by one of their compatriots. It's actually kind of funny to watch. However, you need to understand that you don't need to laugh in their face. That they're basically at this point, Bronze Age, looking at somebody in the Middle Age and going, oh crap, these people can totally screw me over if I, smart off. Okay, that's fine. Just understand the difference here. And they do. Unfortunately, at this point, we only have one true trading partner that trades in different materials. We don't trade in the sciences. It is to be clear that if one of their scientists shows up, they're to be immediately detained and brought forward to command. Okay, we do not share our technology with anyone. Okay, those energy cannons we were using on the turrets, that is classified technology. The way we assemble our turrets, classified technology. And what do you think the nanite bomb's classification is? Classified, sir. You bet your ass. Okay, because OPSEC is still a thing, especially now that everyone around the galactic community looks at us with fear. We just held off 2 separate fleets and we barely took a scratch. Now, they thought that taking out the Poltava was hard. The Poltava was not a purpose-built warship. And the fact that it even survived was almost a fluke. Now we have purpose-built battleships. And we even have 4 actual dreadnoughts. There's a gasp along the room. Oh, you didn't hear about that. Well, you're going to hear about it soon enough. I think I have a small picture. Yes, I have one. Okay, this is a base schematic. This has no extras in it. This is for size comparison. Okay, I'm going to, if you watch the screen, I'm going to put them next to each other. Okay, there. There's gasps along the room as the cadets realize that the new dreadnoughts will be covered stem to stern in weapons and are 4.5 times the size of their current battleship. Sir? A hand is up in the back. Yes, cadet. The cadet stands up. Sir, wouldn't this, why don't we just make a space station? With that, the cadet next to him slapped him on the hip, telling him he should shut up. No, it's fine. You gotta keep everything in mind. It's hard to keep everything up front in your mind, but understand that static defenses are the graveyards of armies. These new dreadnoughts, if what I'm hearing is true, they will be basically moving space stations. They will be able to adjust their positions so that we do not have static defenses beyond our satellites. Thankfully, we've never had to test our satellite grid against anything, which is splendid because I don't know how well it would have stood up against that fleet, really. I mean, they're good, don't get me wrong. They're just, by today's standard, they're antiques. Now, does anybody else have any questions? Okay, last one. He's pointing at one cadet holding his hand up. The cadet stands up. Sir, with this new ships, are we getting into an aggressive stance, sir? That's a very good question, cadet. Sit down. I'm going to answer it. You all need to understand this. The price of peace is eternal vigilance. And with that, I'm going to end the class with the same phrase you've heard ever since you came in. Si vis pacem, parabellum. If you want peace, be prepared for war. Now, we have, to this point, in the galactic community, have never gone out to start a fight. But you bet your ass we will always finish it. The instructor looked at his watch and realized that it was about 10 minutes before these students need to be to the next class. I'll end it here. So get ready. Class dismissed. Everyone simply stood up and stopped. This was a sign of respect as they did not leave before the instructor. The instructor quickly put everything back in his briefcase, closed everything down, and within less than a minute, he was already heading for the door. He raised his hand slightly on the out to make sure nobody sounded off really quick. It's like, as you were, as he walked out.